Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided. This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlaw Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlaw Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome. Access to Democracy returns, and this is an interview that I've been looking forward to for about a month now since we booked it. We have an old friend and a new friend, and our old friend is now the Chief of Police of the City of St. Cloud, William Blair Anderson. I'm allowed to call him Blair. And our new friend is Sergeant Booker Hodges of the Dakota County Sheriff's Office. And I think you're also a commander?
No, I'm a sergeant.
You're a sergeant,
Yeah.
but you specialize in what area there?
Now I'm in charge of our court security.
Court security. And that certainly has become a bigger area of late to worry about. Now, you recently received your doctorate from Hamline University. You are actually, I think, the first member of the Sheriff's Department, African American, who has received a doctorate there, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep. No, yeah, I just got it from Hamline. It took me 7 years.
Yeah, but don't be casual about it. That's a tremendous accomplishment. And we know of your background and your accomplishments, Blair, and we also know that since you arrived in St. Cloud, and when you left us here in Dakota County, you went to Carver County
That's correct.
Sheriff's Office, and now as Chief of Police in St. Cloud, which has a checkered history of late, criminal-wise, things have gotten quite a bit better in the last 3-4 years.
Well, thank you for saying that. St. Cloud had earned a reputation, and we have the second largest university in the state, and it's a growing city. One of the first things that struck me when I was on my way there was that it's the largest city between Fargo, North Dakota, and Minneapolis, and it is growing. And with that, we have our growing pains, but I'm proud of the men and women that I'm fortunate enough to lead in the work that they do to keep that a safe city.
How large a force do you have there?
We have 104 sworn, and we are going to increase that by 3 in 2016. We were just awarded a Department of Justice COPS grant, Office of Community Policing Services, and so we'll be adding 3 more officers to help us in and around the campus area.
Now, what's incredible about both of you, and there's been a really good article about Sergeant Hodges in the Star Tribune, I think last month, if I'm not mistaken, but you both overcame your backgrounds to really rise, not only to the positions you have, but to positions in the community. And why don't you give us a little bit of your background first?
I was born and raised in Minneapolis. I grew up on the Minneapolis North Side. My mom died when I was 12 years old. My dad was abusive towards my mother. So that pretty much formulated a lot of things for how I view the world.
Another abusive husband. Yeah, yeah. And actually, I think your mother died of blunt force trauma that they could never really, or never chose to investigate to prosecution.
Yep.
Is that a fair statement?
Yes. Yep. She died of cerebral hemorrhage, which is a blood clot in the brain that was brought about by blunt force trauma. So in the decision, they just decided not to investigate it, which, looking back on it now, I don't ever regret anything that's ever happened to me in my life because, I know God's always been there for me and always protected me. And I know that everything that God's ever brought me or my family through has been done for a reason. It's made me the person I am today.
But on the other side of the coin, I think if that same incident took place today, it probably would be the subject of a homicide investigation.
Oh, absolutely.
And so it was just you and your brother who were cast loose. And fortunately, I think you had grandparents to go to.
Yep. I lived with my grandma until I graduated high school. So.
And then you went to Florida for your university education. And you got, what, a degree from Florida State?
Yep. Florida Southern. It's a college in
Southern.
Lakeland. Yeah. It's so I got a degree in criminal justice and political science. I got 2 bachelor's degrees from Florida Southern College. Then I came back here. I had to go to MCTC for the skills portion, the law enforcement portion. And then after that, I went to St. Mary's, where Blair went also. I got a master's degree and then on to Hamlin for the doctorate.
And, you say kind of casually, but it's not a casual thing. It's an incredible accomplishment. Now, Blair, you did not come from Minneapolis. You
Did
came
not.
from Detroit, right?
When it was the murder capital of the world.
And when, on occasions, when you were going to school, you would be ducking bullets.
I dodged random gunfire to get to and from school. And ironically, at the time, in the late 60s and 70s, your chances for survival were greater in Beirut than they were in Detroit. And we happened to live in the most active or most violent precinct in the most violent city in the world. And it's
And
weird.
it took its toll on some members of your family also.
It certainly did. I'll put it this way: I didn't have to leave my kitchen table to find folks who were familiar with the criminal justice system, who had been incarcerated, who spent long periods of time incarcerated, and so. What that did for me was, and my father used to say this, that no one is useless. They can always be used as a bad example. And so I was fortunate and blessed enough that there was always somebody looking out for me, and I always had examples of what I should and shouldn't do. And fortunately for me, I was able to stay on that right path.
You rose above it, and, certainly so commendable. To find yourself in law enforcement after that. Well, you did, 8 years in the Army?
I did.
And
I spent some time as a news reporter before 24-hour news and blogs and that sort of thing. And so you were either on the networks or you were nowhere.
well, today, if you sneeze, it goes every place.
Goes viral.
Viral, yeah, that's the word. I'm not sure I'm thrilled about that, but because there's a lot of misinformation out there.
I'm sure I'm not thrilled about it.
That's, and you married very young.
I did. 19. I was a husband and a father at 19 and had no business being either. But I wanted to make sure that my son had a stable environment and that I would be there for him. And clearly it was because of the example that my father set for us. One of the most ironic things is that growing up where I did, amidst all that violence, I never felt unsafe. And it's a weird thing to say. And when I look back on it, sometimes I'm mystified by that. But the reason is because I was literally wrapped in the warmth and the embrace of an entire community. That African proverb, that goes, it takes a village to raise a child is so true, because you're looking at not one but two of those children.
And certainly the north side of Minneapolis was no bed of roses either.
No.
And as a matter of fact, I think there was a tragic event that took place, preparation for high school rehearsal for graduation.
Yeah, when I graduated, for our graduation rehearsal, we'd all finished practicing rehearsal for graduation. So we're all outside, and one of my classmates had a fancy car, and these guys wanted his car. So they shot him in the parking lot. I mean, there had to be at least 200 of us out there. And he drove down the street and crashed into a light pole. A lot of us seen that the day before we were supposed to graduate from high school. So, but that, for, like Blair said, even through all that, it's ironic that you said that you didn't feel like you weren't safe. It's not that you grow up as an adult and you look back, you're like, whoa. Like you said, I was shot at, seen people shot, but I guess you don't realize how bad a situation is sometime when you're in it until you get out of it.
Until you can look back on it, yeah,
Right.
yeah. But the two of you rose above that, and the two of you chose law enforcement, and the two of you have gone on to make wonderful reputations in law enforcement and serve as examples. Would that more of our young people could see and hear and listen to you. And I know you had a youth ministry, certainly in that regard. I know you spent a lot of time working with youth, and people have to understand that there is a better way. And I know if you're in a ghetto, if you're unemployed, if you're in a poor neighborhood, if you don't have the education, you feel that there is no other way but to cross the line into a criminal life. And we see the terrible results of that on a regular basis.
And that's why you need to keep the faith. And I'm not trying to push what I believe in on anyone, but whatever gets you through, because once you get to a place where you lose hope, that's when we see human beings start to do things that seem unnatural to those of us that have remained civil. And I never lost hope, I guess. I always knew that the world was bigger than my street and my neighborhood and my city and my state. And again, the credit goes to my upbringing for that. And
to your own constitution in both your cases.
Well, and to God. I mean, honest to goodness, I'm so blessed that I owe so many people who went before me, no matter what they looked like, no matter what their gender was, but there are a lot of people that paved the way.
And actually, no matter what their beliefs.
Correct.
Because I guarantee you, of the three of us, we have very differing beliefs, but the belief in something that's good and wholesome.
Correct.
And
some of those things are universal. And so for me, I can't ever repay all that those folks have done for me, but I will do my best to try.
Well, you moved into South St. Paul.
I did.
And you were not exactly welcomed by a welcoming committee. Rather, somebody set fire to your house. Is that correct?
It is correct, because I had the temerity to be married to a Caucasian woman, a good old-fashioned Minnesota German girl, and we had interracial children. And unfortunately, we had lived throughout the southern part of the United States where that seems to be more common, or at least historically it was, but it wasn't until
One
we came
wouldn't
back.
think so, but it's true.
It wasn't until we came back to Minnesota that a group of neo-Nazis set fire to our home and tried to kill us.
And, you just shake your head in wonderment about that.
Well, you fill your heart with love so that you don't lose hope and faith in humanity.
Now, you are both the products of a good education. And I know you have several degrees.
Not as many as Sergeant Hodges, but
Well, he's got more degrees than a thermometer. but you have a master's, you have a bachelor's, and I still feel that the two things that drive the criminal element is, number one, lack of education, and you said lack of hope, and also lack of jobs. I mean, if people have jobs, if they have hope, if they have an education and appreciate the opportunity, but as a society, we fail terribly in that regard.
Well, it comes down to the desire for fast money. I mean, everything that you mentioned here with us, the education is an investment. It takes time to go through college, to work your way up, to get, in that way, as opposed to selling drugs, which is fast cash money. And to me, that's what I've seen growing up, was just people's desire to make fast money. And for me, I've never had that desire. I mean, it was growing up not having clothes, or not having the best shoes or a car when I was 16, or even when I was 18, 20 years old, and watch people go down that road all for fast money. And fast money leads to drugs, leads to lots of immoral behaviors, and from my perspective, that's what I've seen a lot of the
And
problems
can
come
lead
from.
to a shortened life also, which is really the shame of it all.
Well, and the thing is, there's no pension plan for hustlers, Mr. Miller. You wind up in one of two places.
Mr. Miller, well,
You wind
that's
up
when
in
you
one
know
of two
you're old,
places.
when they start calling you Mr. Miller, especially.
Well, they're starting to call me sir now, and so I feel old. But there isn't. You either wind up in the penitentiary, or you wind up in the graveyard. I don't know any retired hustlers. I don't know anybody who has been locked up for any amount of time that wish they weren't. Unfortunately for some, they come to that conclusion after it's too late.
You have both given back a lot to your communities. I think you were president of the NAACP for quite a while here in Minnesota.
Yep.
And I know that you have been involved in so many things, particularly educational things, particularly things not only involving inmates, but also involving high school students and all. Is that the answer?
You know what? If I had all the answers, I would bottle them up and give them away. I wouldn't even sell them. But it's a start. And again, someone did it for me. And so I'm living proof of the value, like Sergeant Hodges just talked about, when you invest in people, in human beings, particularly in children, because children are very intuitive. And when we tell them they're our greatest natural resource, but we cut programs that we know are beneficial for them, they pick up on that. When we cut music programs and sports programs and after-school programs, what are they supposed to do? Where are they supposed to go? And for me, growing up, thank goodness for the boys' club, and it's the Boys and Girls Club now. But when I was a kid, it was strictly the Boys Club of America. But it was a refuge from the streets. I had somewhere to go, and I could count on people being there every day to engage me, to challenge me, and to motivate me.
And of course, you have always been close to your faith, and that'll carry you a long way.
Carry you all the way.
Yeah, carry you all the way, all right? I'll buy that. And we have just come through what I call the summer of our discontent. And it's been a horrible summer. You want to use Ferguson as an example. You want to use incidents locally as an example. Number one, the number of black people, mostly men, have been gunned down under very questionable circumstances. Now the shoe seems to be on the other foot, where police are becoming targets. Where are we just going wrong here? Is it too much television? Is it too much violence? What's happening, really?
Well, my personal opinion, I think a lot of it's media. Nationally, in the United States, approximately 132 African Americans lose their lives every year in confrontations with police officers. On the flip side, another 6,200 lose their lives every year at the hands of another African American person. So to me, even when I was in my youth ministry, the NAACP, the focus was always dealing with the 6,200 as opposed to the 132. And I know as police officers, police officers are going to make mistakes, but as a person of color, my personal opinion is that I don't like it when people, African American person commits a crime and their pictures put all on the news, and as an African American, I'm judged or quasi associated with their actions. So I would not judge an entire profession based on the actions of one person or an officer that's highlighted in the media.
And unfortunately, we see it with Muslims in this country right now, where entire communities, including from the mouths of people that aspire to the presidency, they want to really denigrate an entire group of people for what a small minority does, and it really is disturbing
the sadder
to me.
part of that equation is that they're pandering to a much larger group of people who want to believe that the things that they spew out, the vitriol that comes out of their mouths, are true. That's the saddest part. And so for me, the things that have been happening this past summer, and it's been a rough summer. It's not a good time for us right now. But I know that we'll restore the luster that this noble profession deserves. The problem is that these things are not new. Historically, in this country, we've been polarized by many things, and race has always been at the top of the list. And so what happened in Ferguson, the shooting of Michael Brown, and I'm not rendering an opinion because I wasn't there, the shooting itself of that young man was the flashpoint. And the reason I can say that with such certainty is that I read the Department of Justice report, and the things that have been going on in Ferguson for the last 30 or 40 years are nothing short of oppressive. And so
That's
it
the
was a
frightening
powder
part
keg
of it,
waiting
yeah.
to explode, and that is the frightening part.
And we have people who put themselves or the religion above the law. We just have that example of a Secretary of State or whatever she is.
County clerk in
County
Kentucky.
clerk, yeah, in Kentucky, who says that she's following God, not the Supreme Court. Well, there's got to be a law of the land, and until God runs for office, I think we have to rely on the Supreme Court. You can have your beliefs, but if you don't accept the fact that society is changing, and I think people are just frightened that society is changing, and I think that fright is behind a lot of the bigotry that we are really, just living with at the moment, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's human nature for people for people to take shortcuts when dealing with people who are different than they are. And to me, that's one thing we have to get away from in our society is, we typically judge people on how we know of them as opposed to actually knowing them. And there's a huge distinction there. I mean, you can hear all this crazy stuff about people and not know them, and then you meet them and you find out something's different. And as a society, we need to get to actually knowing people as opposed to knowing of people.
One of the things in that regard that I find is in the Middle East, between the Israelis and the Palestinians. You have nothing but anger and predispositions and killing, but if you get two families together, they find that they really have so much in common. And it's the same here. We all basically want the same things for our family. We want it to be better for our children than we had it. And it's just so frightening that after all these years, we don't seem to be able to get past that.
And I agree. And it's interesting that you used that Israel and Palestine. I was just at a meeting yesterday for a civic leadership project that we're doing, one of many that we're doing in St. Cloud, and it's going to be sponsored with a grant from the Central Minnesota Community Foundation and the federal government. And it's going to be run through the Holocaust Museum. They do all kinds of training on ethics and leadership and that sort of thing. And the young man that I was sitting directly across from was from Palestine, and he lived with a family in Israel prior to coming to Minnesota to finish his education at St. Cloud State. So I think your point is spot on. Once you get two groups of people who think they're diametrically opposed together, they find out that we have more in common as human beings than not.
But minds are closed, and sometimes that's the fault of the leaders of the groups, who for their own purposes have closed their minds because of their own insecurity, and yet they have followers.
Well, not only that, we're all products of our environment. And I'm blessed, I'm fortunate. When I was growing up, our house looked like the UN. My parents had all kinds of friends, and the overarching lesson was you take people as they come to you, right? Not what you believe they are, not what someone told you they are, not because of what they look like or how much money they have. Base them on, judge them on how you've interacted with them. And if you do that, you can't go wrong.
But Booker, you didn't have that. You didn't have that interaction. You didn't have that family. So does it come from faith? Where?
Oh, it absolutely comes from faith. I mean, for me, like I said, I know God has really covered me. You know, I'm not saying that I've always been, I had a positive relationship with God. When my mother died, I was mad at God for a lot of years. But I had surrogates, you know, I mean, people I participating in youth hockey. I played hockey all through my life and going up to the Boundary Waters and camping. You know, I've had people that felt in. But my dad, you know, for all of his shortcomings, he taught me how to be the best father I could. And even like Blair said earlier about the bad example. I mean, my dad didn't keep a single promise to me. But for my son, I'm going to keep every single promise, and I do keep every promise that I make to them because of my dad had not kept promises for me. I mean, even something as small as telling me he gets a dime for coming here when I call his name. Whatever the promise is, I mean, he's going to get it just because my dad didn't keep a single promise for me growing up.
And this has been, to me, an incredible interview with two incredible individuals. And even though we have less than a minute left, I hope that we can pursue this down the road even further, because it's listening to gentlemen like the two of you and realizing that you can rise above your surroundings. That's going to make this a better society. And we've been talking with Sergeant Booker Hodges of the Dakota County Sheriff's Office, and William Blair Anderson, Chief of Police, and now in St. Cloud. I'm in your debt, gentlemen. It's been a wonderful interview, and let's continue.
Well, thanks for having us. We appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.